Mildred Hayes was a woman who had stopped caring what other people thought. She lived in a small, quiet town called Ebbing, Missouri. The town was quiet and friendly. People left their doors unlocked. They waved to neighbors from their porches. Everyone knew everyone else's business. But for Mildred, nothing felt safe or friendly anymore. Several months ago, something terrible had happened to her family. Her daughter, Angela, a 17-year-old girl with a bright smile, had been murdered. She was walking to town one evening after an argument with her mother. She never made it. Someone attacked her and then burned her body near the Old Creek Road. The police came. They asked questions. They looked for evidence. They talked to everyone who might have seen something. But weeks passed, then months, and no one was arrested. The case grew cold like the winter wind that blew through the empty streets. Mildred could not sleep at night. She would lie in bed and think about Angela. She remembered the last words they said to each other. Angela wanted to borrow the car to go into town with a friend. Mildred said no because she was worried about Angela drinking. Angela was angry and said something cruel, as teenagers sometimes do. Mildred, angry too, shouted back something she did not mean. Those words haunted her every single night. She would wake up crying and reach for the phone, hoping for news, but the phone never rang with good news. The guilt and the pain were eating her alive. The pain in her heart turned into anger. She looked at the police and saw men who had given up. Chief William Willoughby was a good man, everyone said so. He was kind and fair. He had served the town for many years. But he had stopped working on Angela's case. There were no new leads, no new suspects. The file sat in a drawer collecting dust. Mildred felt that her daughter's life meant nothing to them. She felt that they had forgotten Angela. So she made a decision. She took the little money she had and drove to the advertising company on the edge of town. She wanted to rent the 3 old billboards on the road that led into Ebbing. They had been empty for years, showing nothing but faded wood and rusted metal. The man at the office was surprised, but he took her money. Soon, a work crew arrived with ladders and tools. They worked all morning under the gray sky. The new signs went up on a Monday morning. They were big, black boards with white letters that you could read from far away. The first billboard said, "Murdered while dying." The second one said, "And still no arrests." The third one said, "How come, Chief Willoughby?" The town woke up to those words. People driving to work slowed down to read them. They pointed and whispered. At the diner, where everyone gathered for coffee and eggs, the only topic was the billboards. Some people thought Mildred was brave. Most thought she was cruel. Chief Willoughby was dying of cancer. Everyone knew it. He had a young wife and 2 little girls. He was a popular man who had done a lot of good for the town. People felt the signs were attacking a dying man, and that was wrong. They said Mildred should be ashamed of herself. At the police station, the reaction was stronger. Officer Jason Dixon was the angriest of all. Dixon was a big man who still lived with his mother. He was lazy and spent most of his time reading detective magazines instead of doing real police work. He had a reputation for being violent, especially when he was angry. He hated the billboards because he loved Chief Willoughby like a father. He wanted to hurt Mildred, to make her pay for disrespecting his boss. He talked about her with hate in his voice. Dixon went to the billboards one night with a friend. He tried to start a fight with the man who put them up, but nothing came of it. He was frustrated. He wanted action. His mother told him to be patient, that Mildred would get what she deserved. She said people like her always got what was coming to them. Chief Willoughby himself took a different approach. He was not angry, but he was deeply hurt. He drove to Mildred's house one afternoon. She lived in a small white house with flowers in the front. He knocked on the door and she let him in. They sat in her living room. He was calm and polite. He explained that the police had done everything they could. They had no DNA, no witnesses, no suspects. He showed her the case file to prove it. He told her about his cancer, how it was getting worse every day. He wanted to spend his last days with his family, not fighting about billboards. Mildred listened to every word. Her face did not change. When he finished, she spoke quietly. "I know you're dying, Chief. But my daughter is already dead. The signs will stay up until you make an arrest." Willoughby nodded slowly. He understood her pain. He left the house feeling defeated. He could not give her what she wanted. He got in his car and drove away, feeling heavier than before. Life in Ebbing became difficult for Mildred. People looked at her differently in the grocery store. They moved away from her in the diner. The waitress who used to be friendly now barely spoke to her. Her son, Robbie, who was about 17 himself, was bullied at school. Other kids threw things at him and called his mother names. He came home crying and begged her to take the signs down. Mildred held him and said she could not. She had to fight for Angela. She had to do something. One day, her ex-husband Charlie showed up at the house. Charlie was a big, stupid man with a quick temper. He had left Mildred for a 19-year-old girl named Penelope. He was drunk when he arrived. He started yelling at Mildred about the billboards. He said they were embarrassing him. People were talking about him at work. They fought. Charlie grabbed her by the shirt and shook her. Robbie came running and pushed his father away. Charlie left, but the fear stayed. Mildred locked the doors and sat in the dark for a long time. At the police station, things were getting worse for Willoughby. He had a terrible coughing fit one morning. Blood came up from his lungs and sprayed across Dixon's face. Dixon stood there, shocked and scared. He realized how sick his friend really was. Willoughby went home that day and did not come back to work for a while. The station felt empty without him. Willoughby made a decision. He wanted one perfect day with his family. He took his wife and his 2 little girls to the lake. They had a picnic. They played in the water. They laughed and took pictures. It was a beautiful, happy day. The sun was warm and the children's laughter filled the air. That night, after his wife and daughters were asleep, he went into the barn. He took his police revolver and shot himself. He left 3 letters behind. One was for his wife. One was for Mildred. One was for Dixon. The news of Willoughby's death spread through Ebbing like fire. People cried in the streets. They left flowers at the police station. They held a memorial service that was packed with mourners. And many of them blamed Mildred Hayes. They said her billboards had pushed a dying man over the edge. They said she killed him as surely as if she had pulled the trigger herself. The anger against her grew stronger and darker. Someone threw a bottle at her house. Someone wrote ugly words on her door. At the police station, Dixon sat alone with Willoughby's body before the ambulance came. He opened his letter with shaking hands. In it, Willoughby wrote kind words. He said Dixon was not a bad man. He said he could be a great detective if he stopped being angry and hateful. He told him to let love guide his actions, not hate. He said he believed in him. Dixon cried like a child. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket, close to his heart. Mildred got her letter too. She opened it standing in her kitchen. Willoughby wrote that he had paid the next month's rent on the billboards. He did not want her to give up. He said he killed himself because of the pain from his cancer, not because of the signs. He hoped the billboards would lead to justice for Angela. He forgave her for everything. He said he understood her pain. Mildred sat down at her kitchen table and wept. She wept for Angela. She wept for Willoughby. She wept for herself. The night of Willoughby's funeral, Dixon was alone at the police station. He was reading a detective magazine, trying to learn something. It was late and quiet. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside. He looked up and saw a figure running away from the building. Then he smelled gas. A moment later, a bottle of fire crashed through the window. The station exploded into flames. Glass shattered everywhere. Fire spread quickly. Dixon ran for the door. But then he stopped. The Angela Hayes case file was still on his desk. Willoughby's letter had changed him. He wanted to be the man Willoughby believed he could be. He ran back through the fire, grabbed the file, and threw himself out the door. His clothes were on fire. He rolled on the ground, screaming in pain. Neighbors came running with blankets. They put out the flames, but Dixon was badly burned. His face and hands were covered in burns. He was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. In his burned hands, he still held the file. He would not let it go. Who threw the bomb? It was Mildred. That night, she had been sitting at home, filled with rage. She believed the police had given up on Angela. She thought, if I burn down the station, it will destroy the files, and then they will have to start a new investigation. She did not think anyone would be inside. It was late at night. When she saw the news on television and learned Dixon was hurt, she was horrified. She had not meant to hurt anyone. She sat in her dark living room and wondered what kind of person she had become. In the hospital, Dixon lay in a bed with bandages covering most of his body. He could barely move. He shared a room with a young man who was there for a different reason. The young man started talking. He said he had been at a party recently. A man there was drunk and bragging. The man talked about hurting a girl. He said things that made the young man uncomfortable. He described details that sounded familiar. Dixon listened carefully. His detective instincts told him this was important. When the young man left the room, Dixon called a nurse. He asked for paper and a pen. With his burned and bandaged hands, he wrote down everything the man had said. It was difficult and painful. He wrote down the man's name, or at least the name the young man remembered. It was a name like James or something similar. Dixon called his friend at the station and told him about the lead. He felt hopeful for the first time in a long time. Days passed. A new police chief came to Ebbing. He was a young man from another town. He had no interest in an old, cold case. He wanted to focus on new problems. He visited Dixon in the hospital and told him they were closing the Angela Hayes investigation. There was no money and no new evidence. The case was too old. Dixon tried to tell him about the man from the party. The new chief did not care. He had other things to focus on. Dixon was frustrated, but he did not give up. This was his chance to be the detective Willoughby believed he could be. He would not let it go. One afternoon, Mildred was sitting in the diner. She was drinking coffee and staring out the window. She came here sometimes because it was warm and she did not want to be alone in her house. A man came in and sat a few tables away from her. He was big and red-faced. He started talking loudly to his friend. He said, "Angela Hayes. Wasn't that the girl who was killed and burned?" He laughed a little. Mildred's blood ran cold. She recognized him. He had been with her ex-husband Charlie one time. He was the man from Dixon's story. She watched him carefully. He ordered food and kept talking. He seemed proud of himself. He went to the restroom. She followed him and stood outside the door. She heard him talking to another man inside. He was bragging again, saying terrible things about hurting a girl. He said things that made Mildred's stomach turn. Her hands shook with anger and fear. This was him. This had to be the man who killed Angela. She went back to her table and waited. She tried to act normal. When he left, she followed him to his truck. She wrote down his license plate number on a napkin. Then she drove straight to the hospital. She went to Dixon's room. The two of them looked at each other. They had been enemies. Now they had the same goal. Mildred showed Dixon the license plate number. Dixon told her the story from the young man in his room. They compared notes. Everything matched. The man's name was probably something like John or James. He was in the army, stationed at a nearby base. He had a history of violence. They had a strong suspect. For the first time in months, they had real hope. But what could they do? The police would not help. The new chief thought the case was closed. They had no proof, only words from a man in a bar and a license plate number. That was not enough for an arrest. They needed more. They decided to take action themselves. It was risky, but they had no other choice. Mildred drove to the address they had found. It was a lonely farmhouse outside of town. The road was empty. The fields were brown and dry. She parked her car on the road and walked toward the house. Her heart was beating fast. She thought about the gun in her bag. She thought about Angela. She thought about revenge. She imagined walking up to the door and shooting the man who killed her daughter. But then she stopped. Doubt filled her mind. What if it was not him? What if they killed the wrong man? She had already done terrible things. She had burned the police station. She had hurt Dixon. Could she do this? She walked back to her car and drove to a payphone. She called the hospital and asked for Dixon's room. When he came on the line, she told him where she was. She told him she was not sure what to do. Dixon was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke slowly. "I'm not sure either, Mildred. We can't just go and kill him. That's not justice. That's revenge. Willoughby's letter said to let love guide us. Let's think about this. We need to do this right." Mildred listened. She thought about Willoughby's letter too. She thought about his kindness, even at the end. She got back in her car and drove away from the farmhouse. She went back to the hospital. She sat by Dixon's bed. They did not speak for a long time. They just sat there, two damaged people who had done terrible things but were trying to do something right. They were not friends. They would probably never be friends. But they shared something now. They shared a purpose. They had a suspect. They had a license plate number. They had a name. They did not have proof, but they had a place to start. They had each other, in a strange way. The hospital room was quiet. Outside, the sun was setting over Ebbing. The sky was orange and pink. The 3 billboards still stood on the lonely road. asking their question to everyone who passed by. The answer was still out there somewhere. They would find it. They had to. Mildred looked at Dixon. "So what do we do now?" she asked. Dixon looked back at her. His face was still bandaged, but his eyes were clear and determined. "We find out more about him. We watch him. We wait. We talk to people who know him. We look for evidence. And when we have proof, we go to the police. If they won't listen, we find another way. But we do it right. We do it together. That's what Willoughby would want." Mildred nodded slowly. It was not the ending she had imagined. There was no gunfight, no dramatic confession. There was just this, two people in a hospital room, holding on to a thin thread of hope. The man was still free. They did not know for sure if he was the killer. But they had something to hold on to. They had a direction. They had a plan. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more pain, more doubt, more difficult choices. But for the first time in months, Mildred felt something other than anger. She felt hope. It was small and fragile, but it was there. And the billboards stayed up, asking their question to the wind, waiting for an answer that would not come easily.